Today, let's dive into the life of Kit Carson, an iconic American scout. Before railroads and maps, Kit Carson led America into the great unknown. Carson was a legendary scout, guiding explorers and settlers through the wild frontier. But behind the legend was a man torn between survival, duty, and history. Christopher Houston Carson was born in Kentucky in 1809, but grew up in Missouri, the edge of the frontier. Back then, the Louisiana Purchase happened, but much of the land west of the Mississippi was still a mystery. A world of mountains, rivers, and Native American tribes called to young Kit for adventure. At just 16, he ran away from an apprenticeship to join the fur trade. His father branded him a disgrace, but Kit was resolute. He would carve his own name in the frontier's rugged landscape. His first taste of the wild was with a group of French-Canadian voyageurs, and it was a baptism of fire. The Mississippi River was their highway, but that meant little when storms tossed their keelboats like toys. On one such journey, Kit survived a capsizing that killed 2 of his companions. And by the time they reached New Orleans, he had lost his entire life savings in a card game to a slick gambler. From here, though, there was no turning back. Kit pressed on to St. Louis, where he bought a rifle, strapped on a backpack, and set off west. With him, he carried his mother's Bible, his only link to civilization and the only hope of salvation in a wilderness of danger and despair. His destination was the Rocky Mountains, the heart of the fur trade and the gateway to the untamed wild. It was here that Kit Carson would spend more than a decade of his life as a mountain man, hunting and trapping in some of the most treacherous and beautiful landscapes in North America. He roamed the Rockies from the Arkansas River to the Rio Grande, from the valleys to the peaks, from the forests to the high deserts. He learned the terrain like the lines on his calloused hands, every bend and twist, every peak and pass, every river and stream. He knew the secrets of the mountains, the trails that led to hidden valleys, the passes that cut through rugged slopes, the streams that flowed with icy cold water, the meadows filled with herbs and plants. He became fluent in sign language, and he learned the habits and ways of the different tribes that inhabited this vast region. In fact, he married 2 native women, one from the Navajo and another from the Taos Pueblo. They lived among the people for long periods of time, learning their customs, traditions, and beliefs. In the process, he learned to live with nature and became a skilled hunter, trapper, and guide. When he wasn't busy hunting, Carson honed his marksmanship, developed a sixth sense for danger, and learned to read the signs of the land. His skills were put to the test when he found himself targeted by both rival hunters and hostile tribes. One time, he managed to escape an ambush by the Cheyenne tribe by hiding in a buffalo carcass. Another time, he tracked down and single-handedly defended a party of immigrants being attacked by a band of Apaches. As he moved from one trading post to another, Carson picked up the stories of these new lands, tales of gold mines, wagon trains, and fertile valleys. But these stories were often mixed with warnings of dangerous trails, hostile natives, and unforgiving terrain. Despite the danger, the lure of the frontier was too strong to resist. People wanted to know what lay beyond the mountains, and Carson became the key to unlocking the secrets of the West. In the early 1830s, Kit Carson was already considered a legend. His name echoed around campfires, spoken in hushed tones by prospectors, traders, and settlers alike. They called him the man who could find a trail where no one else could, the man who could navigate the wildest terrain and survive the harshest conditions. Then, in 1842, everything changed. That year, American explorer John C. Fremont set out on an expedition to map the West. His team consisted of scientists, surveyors, and soldiers, but he needed a guide, someone who knew the land and could lead them safely through the uncharted wilderness. He heard about Carson and sent word that if Carson was willing, he would pay him handsomely to guide his team to the Pacific Ocean and back. It was an offer Kit Carson could not refuse. So began one of the most famous expeditions in American history. For over 2 years, Carson led Fremont and his men through some of the most inhospitable terrain on Earth. They crossed the Great Plains, climbed the Rocky Mountains, traversed the Columbia River, and explored the Oregon Territory. Carson proved to be an invaluable guide, helping the team navigate treacherous terrain, avoid hostile tribes, and survive the elements. But it was not without its challenges. Supplies often ran low, tempers flared, and the threat of hostile tribes loomed large. But through it all, Carson remained calm and resourceful, always finding a way to press on. Finally, on November 29th, 1844, Fremont and his men emerged from the wilderness at the mouth of the Columbia River. They had successfully reached the Pacific Ocean, and it was all thanks to Carson's expert guidance. News of their journey spread like wildfire, and Carson's reputation as the greatest scout of his time was cemented. Newspapers across the country published stories of his bravery and skill, and people began to see him as a larger-than-life figure, a symbol of the American spirit of exploration and conquest. However, while Carson was celebrated as a hero in the East, his life was far from a fairy tale. The reality was much more complex and often brutal. In addition to his guiding work, Carson also fought in several wars, including the Mexican-American War and the American-Indian Wars. He was involved in some of the most violent and controversial campaigns of his time, such as the brutal suppression of the Navajo Nation in the 1860s. This was during a period known as the Long Walk, when Kit Carson forced thousands of Navajo people to abandon their homes and walk more than 300 miles to a desolate reservation. Throughout his life, he straddled two worlds. On one hand, he had respect and affection for Native American cultures. He had lived among them, learned their languages, and even married two Native women. On the other hand, he was a soldier and scout for the U.S. Army, tasked with carrying out orders that often went against his personal beliefs and values. Despite his complicated legacy, Kit Carson remains a pivotal figure in American history. He embodied the spirit of exploration and conquest that drove the nation westward during the 19th century. His story is a reminder that history is rarely black and white, and that even the most celebrated figures can be involved in both heroic and controversial events. By the 1860s, however, Kit Carson was weary. The fur trade was all but gone, replaced by the steady march of settlers and railroads. The wild places he loved were being tamed, and he felt the pull of a simpler life. So when his wife died in 1863, he decided to settle down. He moved his family to a ranch near Taos, New Mexico, where he spent his remaining years raising crops and livestock, but it was a difficult transition. The old scout was haunted by the changing times. He saw the impact of westward expansion on the very lands and people he had helped to explore and conquer. In some ways, he saw the beauty of new settlements and farms, but in other ways, he mourned the loss of the wild places he loved so much. In 1868, Kit Carson's health began to decline rapidly. He developed stomach cancer and died on May 23, 1868. At the age of 58, he was buried in a small cemetery in Taos with full military honors. Although he had chosen to leave the wild places of the frontier, the wild places did not release him. Today, his legacy lives on in the Wild West tales and dime novels that captured the imagination of generations of Americans. He has been immortalized in paintings and sculptures, and his name continues to echo in the windswept canyons and mountain passes of the American West. The story of Kit Carson is more than just an adventure story. It is a story of a man caught between two worlds, a man who helped open up the American West, but who also saw the cost of that expansion. It is a story of courage and resilience, but also of the complexities of human nature. Kit Carson was a man of contradictions, a mountain man who became a celebrity, a soldier who respected Native American cultures, a pioneer who mourned the loss of the wilderness. He was, above all, a product of his time, a man who lived at the crossroads of history when America pushed westward at any cost. And with that ends our journey into the life of Kit Carson, the man, the myth, and the scout who carved a path into the unknown. Thank you for joining me today. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to my channel and leave a comment below to share your thoughts. Until next time, stay curious and keep exploring.